Trump apparently holds a grudge against Netanyahu, feeling that Netanyahu was too quick to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory in 2020, because, of course, at that point, Trump was still claiming the election had been rigged.
So let's start with the Middle East, because tomorrow the Israeli Prime Minister will be the first foreign leader to meet President Trump in the Oval Office since the election, and a lot is resting on that. Mainly, they're talking about, well, today is meant to be the deadline to move to phase 2 in the Gaza ceasefire. What is phase 2, and is that going to happen?
Well, effectively, phase 2 takes the hostage exchange further, moving towards the full and final exchange of the hostages with prisoners being held by the Israelis. Now, that includes, sadly, the dead.
Yeah.
So Hamas is meant to give an account of those who've died as well. And that's supposed to happen. Now, at the same time, the Israelis are supposed to pull back in various parts of Gaza and essentially end their military operation on the ground in Gaza. And the thing is meant to assume a sort of unstoppable quality at that point. The Israelis attempted to wind in a clause that would allow them to return to military operations if they felt Hamas was either breaking the terms of the deal or, for example, was not giving back any more hostages. But as you say quite rightly, they pass that point sort of today, tomorrow-ish. And so then Israel does have to commit. And lo and behold, tomorrow is the day that Trump chooses to have Netanyahu into the Oval Office as his first visit to the Oval of any foreign leader during this presidency. So that's the significance that's been given to it. And Trump has suddenly freighted this meeting with all sorts of additional significance. And this is something I was writing about in the Sunday Times yesterday, because by throwing out this idea, he said this just over a week ago. Oh, it's so destroyed in Gaza that we should move out 1.5 million Palestinians while the place is rebuilt. Now,
ethnic cleansing from the White House.
Well, that is absolutely how it's been characterised in the Arab world. I mean, you can say real fear and loathing spread after that. And, of course, a lot of people then said, classic sort of trying to interpret off-the-cuff remarks from Trump. Oh, well, maybe he didn't mean it, maybe it was a misspeak, maybe it was some kind
He always means it.
No, absolutely. That's some kind of black humour. Well, as someone who worked with him closely said to me when we were talking about Greenland and all the other stuff, it's never a slip, it's never just joking. As you say, he's always testing the envelope. Now, people thought, well, he's tested the envelope, and Egypt and Jordan, which is the two countries he talked about taking these Palestinians, firmly said, don't even think about it. But on Thursday, when someone put this to him, the countries you've mentioned say no way, Trump said at a photo op in the Oval, they will do it. They've got to do it. And we do lots of things for them. So he basically linked it to aid to Egypt and Jordan. So I think that potentially could emerge as a really, really big story. I mean, in the short term, yes, the Gaza ceasefire. Does Netanyahu go to the next stage, which in theory will cause the collapse of his coalition, because one of the big parties, led by this guy, far-right party, Bezalel Smotrich, says they've got 7 seats in the Israeli parliament. They're going to leave the coalition if he does. They argue Israel should carry on fighting Hamas. They don't like the deal. So Netanyahu is between a rock and a hard place in that sense. The coalition could collapse. But Trump is really twisting his arm.
And the relationship between the two men is not good.
No,
right?
They don't like each other. And in a way, when you have two sort of abrasive populist politicians a lot of whose political method involves sort of manoeuvre and trying to wrong foot everyone else, it's hardly surprising that it shouldn't be an easy relationship. But Trump apparently holds a grudge against Netanyahu, feeling that Netanyahu was too quick to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory in 2020, because, of course, at that point, Trump was still claiming the election had been rigged. There's bad blood. And I think Netanyahu also knows in his heart of hearts that although he's the master of manoeuvre and coming up with political answers that are effectively neither of the above, when faced with these apparently binary dilemmas, that he can't really get much past Trump at this point, because Trump, not only is Trump saying, oh, yeah, you can have the bombs that Biden stopped, he's taken sanctions off some of these extremist West Bank settlers. He's also now apparently saying, oh, I'm going to help realise one of the kind of fever dreams of the Israeli far right over the decades and move hundreds of thousands of Palestinians out of Gaza. So, I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher, really.
Look, I want to talk to you a bit about the extent to which Donald Trump is sort of blowing up every assumption of American political diplomacy. Obviously, we'll talk about tariffs in a minute, but tell us a little bit about what's going on with overseas aid.
Well, one of the things that's been happening in Washington is that, and it's causing a lot of consternation. Now, some of the things that are being said in leaks are not necessarily reliable. I mean, we're in a quite unknown world here. And this concerns actions by this so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is the Elon Musk-led attempt to massively drive down federal spending and rationalise various US government programmes. Now, it's not an officially constituted department. Constitutionally, the position of DOGE is nothing, really. It's a sort of letterhead, or as it were, or an email address, and not much more than that. And but what's happened is they've gone into the Treasury Department and apparently got data that relates to the whole gamut of US government spending, all sorts of stuff which people regard as, super sensitive, including stuff on the intelligence services, all sorts of other things. They've also just put a complete freeze on the activities of USAID, which is the big US government international aid organization that funds programs all around the world, doing all those things you would imagine.
Feeding people, inoculating people.
Exactly, exactly.
Has that all stopped?
Apparently it has, yeah. Their operations have stopped. I mean, there'll be a certain amount of money in the system, and one assumes that field workers and people, will be making decisions as to whether they should go out in the, in the Land Cruiser this morning and carry on, digging wells or inoculating people or whatever else they're supervising. But I mean, that's a big moment. There's also been a whole series of things happening at the FBI, where it's said that 6 senior officers who were involved with the January the 6th inquiries have all had to resign, and that loads of other people, basically they're being asked to come forward, agents at the FBI are being asked to come forward if they had anything to do with the January the 6th inquiries, and the implication is in order to be fired. So this idea that Trump would impose some kind of loyalty test on the FBI, which of course is very sensitive in the US because effectively it is a bit like the security service in the UK, as well as having its crime fighting functions. It deals with radical political threats, terrorism, that kind of thing. That suddenly it's becoming a reality, not so much a loyalty test, but a purge of people who had anything to do with those prosecuted January the 6th insurrectionists. And of course, that means all sorts of things in terms of the organisation, the fate of various people within it, but also its kind of institutional self-confidence and its ability to, if there is extremist activity, say, on the fringes of the Proud Boys or one of these other groups that was involved in January the 6th, will they investigate it without fear or favour now going forward?
Are we sort of nearing the stage where we could say we've not seen political upheaval like this in a democratic state in decades, if ever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we there are certain democratic states which have undergone, coups and revolutions and all the rest of it. If we think back, I mean, look at what's going on in South Korea at the moment. That's something we've talked about. But no, it's huge. There's no two ways about it. It's huge. And I think, bringing us on to our next topic, I think the immediate questions, people were asking me, in the run-up to the inauguration, will Trump go to war with Iran and all the rest of it? And I was saying, well, look, I think there's less risk of that than there is of some kind of global economic crisis, a systemic crisis touched off by tariffs.
So I mean, on tariffs, there's already been retaliation on tariffs in both Canada and Mexico. Just hours after Trump announced he'd imposed tariffs on Canada, hockey fans in Ottawa booed the end of the US national anthem during a hockey game. Mark, we've not got long, but what are the chances of this just sort of going wrong and there being a climb down? And if so, how long would that take?
well, there could well be a climb down. I think the big questions now concern all this stuff around supply chains. This idea that a car or its sub-assemblies might cross the US-Canadian border 5 or 6 times during construction. What is going to happen to complex supply chains like that if you suddenly whack on this 25% tariff? It's huge, and it's also going to be big in its effects on things like the financial markets and the bond markets, the cost of borrowing for governments, including the UK one. And that's where I think the dangers lie of a broader economic crisis.
And aside from Justin Trudeau just sort of being a liberal who Trump doesn't like, why Canada? What did Canada ever do to them?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Well, it seems to have got caught up with Trump's idea that, America should expand territorially during his second term. And, Canada, in a certain sense, has been put in the crosshairs. I mean, does anyone really think it's going to become the 51st state? And I think, it's quite interesting. I was looking at some statements a few weeks ago by Trump's nominees for commerce and one of his key economic advisors about tariffs and what they intended to do. And they did not say anything like this. They highlighted, for example, that the EU puts tariffs on American cars, but not vice versa. Yeah. So we're going to level that up. Yeah. That kind of thing, which seemed logical, even if you're a free trade enthusiast, not good. But this is completely different. It just appears to be punitive.
And if they're the 51st state, that means he expects to get them before he gets Greenland as well. Thank you very much indeed, Mark Urban. Always great to hear Mark. You can hear him at this time every Monday, and you can, of course, read him in the Sunday Times every week.